Hey gang, welcome back to another video here at Jade's Garage. Today's video, I'm going to be working on door hinges for a 68 Mustang. Now, I've already done previous videos where I rebuilt the door hinges for the Brooklyn Pony Mustang, which is a 66 Mustang convertible. And if you haven't seen any of those videos, I suggest you go check out the playlist for that car. And I've also rebuilt hinges for a 67 Mustang, which is very similar to the 65 and 66. The 68 is different. It's the same process, but it's a different hinge. So I'm going to go over the details on how to rebuild the hinges for the 68 Mustang. If you're new to the channel, I suggest you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to get more videos like this. There are several differences between the 65 and 6, the 67 and the 68. I don't have the 67 hinge here, but like I said, I've already done a video on that. I want to point out the 65 and 6 hinge, this is like, well, cast iron. These are really heavy, and this is the upper hinge, which I've already rebuilt, and this is the lower hinge. This one has a spring on it and a retaining arm, so when you open a door, it holds it in the open position. Let me set those aside. The 68 hinges are more of a stamped steel. They're not cast, but the function is the same. So the upper hinge is a little more oblong looking, let's say, as compared to the upper hinge for the 65 and 6. Same thing though, just has a pin with bushings holding it together. The lower hinge is completely different. As you can see, it has this kind of a S-hook or S-shape, and that is your spring device that holds the door in the open position. I am not even going to try to remove that thing. I'm sure there's some sort of way to do it. I'm not taking that chance. I'm just going to rebuild the hinge itself and the pivot point. Now this hinge I've already taken apart. The bushings have been removed, so you can see there's a bunch of play now with the pin. And this is the lower hinge that is identical to this hinge, except opposite, obviously. And I removed the pin and the bushings as well in this one. And I'll go over more of that whenever I take the other ones apart. I just wanted to show you what they look like. You'll also notice there are a couple of little rollers on this part of the hinge assembly. I'm not going to remove those, but I'm going to make an effort to free them up because those ride on the spring, as mentioned here. So whenever this rotates, it hits on that spring, and that's what holds the door open. So these, I don't think they've been lubricated, haven't moved in years, but I want to clean those up and make them work. I also want to point out that I'm using a 65 to 73 door hinge pin and bushing kit. You can buy these individually, and I have several of these that I'm going to use. Again, this is less complicated, let's say, than the 65 and 6. And when you buy one of those kits, I recommend you get the full kit that comes with the arm, the spring, and the other pins associated with those parts. I have a suggestion for you. Whenever you do these, either do one side at a time so that you have a mirror reference to put these back together, or when you take them apart, take a zip tie and run it through the hinge. Because you don't want to be confused later on when it comes time to put this back together, and the zip tie will hold it in place, and you're not going to question it. Especially since they're different from side to side. I want to show you how I take these hinges apart. I will need some hearing protection, some safety glasses, and some gloves, and I'm going to use a little butane porch or MAP gas and take apart this lower hinge first. Now to do that, you'll notice I've got a 9/16 socket. That just slips over the head of that pin. Gives me a place to put it so that I can hit it with a hammer. What I want to do is heat up the hinge itself where the pin presses through. So I'm going around the pin hopefully allowing some expansion of that part of the hinge itself. Now you just saw it turn there. So some of the tension came off just from that heat. Gonna heat up the bottom side too. Now I want to drive that pin out. This is where it helps to have a second set of hands. But I don't. Now I have a longer punch that I can use. So now that's apart. At this point, I want to knock out the bushings. So I can take that longer punch, or I can come in from the side with the shorter punch and drive those out. I'll try the longer punch. You can probably see the bushing is actually breaking apart, which isn't uncommon. There it went. So there's the bushing. Now to knock out the opposite one. This will make it even easier. If you have a vise handy, you can come back in. And that's the second bushing. Now, I can repeat the process for the upper hinge. Same thing. I can heat it up, take the socket, put it around the pin, and drive it out. Now that I have these apart, I'm going to use my media blaster and clean them up. You know, get off any paint, junk, whatever that's on there, and get them prepped for new bushings. I did an experiment too. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I put this Braun light in there to help light up the work. And you can see it's covered in grit. So may or may not be a good idea. So at this point, everything cleaned up pretty nice. There may be a few small areas where there's a little bit of paint hanging on. I want to point out a couple things. I noticed this lower hinge, or I'm sorry, this upper hinge, there's a weld on here. So I don't know, I'm assuming that has to be from the factory. I don't know why they would have done that, but there is definitely a weld added there. And then on the lower hinge, there's weld in these corners. Again, that has to be factory. There's no reason somebody would have done that. And I don't know if it had to be because when it was stamped, those were weak points, but you can definitely see the weld. One other thing I want to point out, these little rollers that are on the lower hinge, they'll get grit in them from media blasting. I don't know if you can hear that over my neighbor's bobcat running, but these have like a little spring in between the top of this pin and the roller, and that's really just like a I say a spring. It's a piece of metal that's kind of like a wave. So that's what holds it in place. And what you may have to do is wiggle that around a little bit and work that grit out of the rollers, because you definitely want those to be smooth, and it may just take a little bit of time. Now at this point you have two choices really. You could assemble these, put the bushings in place, press the pins back in, or you could paint them. Either way, it doesn't really matter. But at this point, with them being raw, there's no paint, it might be a little easier. I'm going to paint these so that when they're assembled, it's all done and I've got paint inside the overlaps. And again, probably not that critical, as this won't see much in the way of weather or won't affect it. But I'm just going to paint all these pieces and then I'll assemble them. Now you could use a primer, you could use self-etch, you could use a variety of things. I've used this before and I like it. This is some chassis and grill paint, and I put it on other ones. Ideally I just want to get paint on them so I can get them together, and then when they're on the car and I get everything ready for actual paint, I can scuff this, and then apply my primer and then apply my paint. So okay, now that I have the pieces painted, I need to get the bushings installed. And I want to show you a couple things with that. I've got two different pins here. I have the really long pin that came in that kit, and then I have a shorter pin that is a leftover from another hinge repair that I did. I'm going to be using the longer one as a guide. So if you'll notice, and this one had some wear on it, this first bushing will almost push in with my hand, almost. But I'm just trying to, or there you can see it, it started sliding in. But what I want to do is make sure it's aligned properly for the second bushing, because it doesn't want to go in. So if I use the pin, that helps me align it, keep it nice and straight. And then what I want to do, because I know it would be a little bit difficult to press it in because I don't have an upright press, I usually use my vise. All I want to do is start this pin into this part of the bracket or the hinge. So what I'm using in this case is a 3/8 socket. So that'll slip over that pin, and it won't go, the pin is so long that it'll hit that socket and push it away. So I need to make sure the pin is kind of collapsed a little bit. And I'm just going to hold all this in place with my hand and just take the hammer and gently tap on the socket. And this one went right in. You can see that. So that's all it really took for this bracket, which is the upper bracket. And then same thing with this bushing. I'll take the pin and turn it around. And it may not be that necessary, but I'm going to do the same thing with the socket and the hammer. And basically that's all it's going to take on this particular hinge to put in the new bushings. Went right in. Now, again, you want to make sure that the pin turns freely. You don't want, the bushing sideways where it's going to bind. But that takes care of putting in the bushings. Now this is why, in this case, I only did one side at a time. And as I mentioned before, I used a zip tie to hold this one together so that I would have a visual reference for how they went back together. Now, not that you couldn't take some pictures or something like that, but by having a comparative piece, I could just do a mirror. Now, one thing I want to show you too, with this long pin, I'm going to cut this pin off. It's really too long. You can insert it. Let me get that lined up. And you end up with a really long piece hanging out. So what I want to do is, if I compare that to, let's say, one of the original pins, I can look at the length, and you can see it just barely came through the bottom. Well, I mean, it came through the lower side here, or the bottom side, maybe 3/16 of an inch, maybe a quarter. So I'm going to trim down this post to the same length as the original. Now to do that, there's a variety of ways. You could use a Sawzall, you could use a Ziz wheel, you could use a chop saw, variety, whatever is convenient for you. In my case, I'll probably just use a cutoff wheel and cut it down to the size that I need. Another quick tip here, an observation. If you'll notice, the serrated edges on this pin are very, very short compared to this pin, which are longer. The conflict with that is whenever this pin is inserted into the outer portion of the hinge, let's say, those little serrated teeth only bite in so far into this piece. If I were to use this piece the way it is, that pin, it would actually go into the bushing. Hopefully you can see that. It would bite into the top part of the bushing. So another thing I'm going to do is take a sanding disc and knock down those teeth on that serrated edge there so that it's about the same dimension as that one. Now that pin is shortened, all I need to do is assemble everything. And again, verify the mirror image of this other hinge. And I will point out that the witness mark of where the old pin went through is here, and you can see it in the, or I can see it, inside the opening on this upper hole. So just in case you were wondering, get that lined up. And now what I need to do is I'm going to take another little socket. This is a 3/8 inch stubby. I'm going to slip that around the base of the pin, and I'm just going to use the vise as a press and push that pin into the hinge. And that's it. It's bottomed out, sticking out at the bottom. Perfect. Now I need to repeat that process for the lower hinge. Now, as I pointed out, I'm using a leftover pin from another hinge kit. It's the same size, same dimensions, but the length on this one is actually right at the limit of the short side compared to the original pin. If I push it against the other one, hopefully you can see that it is just a hair shorter, but if I compare it to the length that it's going to go through, and I put a little piece of tape here because I know that the pin goes in from this side, but it does stick out the bottom, or it will stick out enough at the bottom that it'll be fine. Another thing I want to point out as well, same situation. This pin has the short serrated groove there, edging, whatever. This one, it's long. So I'm going to do the same thing and grind this one down with a sander so that it doesn't interfere with the bushing itself. Prior to that though, I will do the same basic process. You know, these bushings are comparatively a little bit longer than the other kit. It really doesn't make a difference, but I am just using these bushings. So what I'll do, same idea, I can get this one set, or try to get it set, and take the pin, put it through. And again, it's all about alignment. That's all I'm trying to do, is get these aligned. Same concept, I can take socket and just gently tap that. And it has started to go through. So now I'll take the pin and flip it around. Get the other one aligned. Same way. Take socket. That one's actually going in easier. Nice alignment. So maybe I can drive that other one in. It's already partway through that side, so I think I'll just try to use the vise. Finish the process. Perfect. Make sure to do a comparative fit. Yep. It will go together. A little snug, but that's okay. Okay. So I'm going to grind down the serrated edge on that pin and then drive on from there. So as I said, I've knocked down the grooves, and now I just need to put the pieces together. And I may use this long pin just to help me align it. There we go. Okay. That's aligned. Now I can take the pin I'm going to use, a shorter pin, get it in place, and hopefully I can use the vise again Now, of course, I can't make the full range of motion because, you know, you need the force of the door to overcome the spring. But now I have a completed set of door hinges, and I don't know which side this is for. I guess probably the passenger side. I don't know. I'll figure it out whenever I go to put it back together. But that takes care of this side. Now, another thing you'll probably want to do is add some lubricant. You could use some grease, you know, work it into these, I don't know what you want to call them, little gear looking things that ride on the spring, and, you know, help them rotate and turn. But that's going to be, you know, it. I still need to clean up the other set of hinges, get them put together, and then I want to get them back on the car. Okay, one final look, and I did do a check. This is the passenger side set of hinges, driver's side. And, you know, I don't think these are as complicated or as hard to do as the 65 and 6. However, I would not even consider trying to take this spring out of here. I'm sure they had some sort of a mechanical device that put torque on this so that it could go in here. And there is a little groove actually cut into, or notch cut into this spring so that it can't slide out. I thought that was pretty creative for them. Anyway, that's a final look at the hinges. And again, the part number that I'm using, the main part, the real long pin, was HW468, and I believe I got these from CJ Pony Parts. Probably the same part number from various other people as well. Okay, that'll be the end of this video. There's more to come on Jade, so I look forward to sharing those videos with you. But I hope you found this information useful and can help you with your project. If you haven't, I ask you to subscribe, leave a thumbs up, and leave a comment on this video. And there is more to come, I promise. But until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.